The story begins in a magical world that has locations such as dungeons. Dungeons are vaults scattered throughout the world and hidden for centuries. They are usually guarded by curses and evil monsters. They were out of reach for all but the most powerful adventurers until a new weapon was created. At some point, a system window appeared in front of one of the adventurers, asking him if he wanted to perform the summoning, and the man agreed. The system congratulated him on receiving a weapon of a very rare class. After this, the man stood before the monster, ready to fight it. The fact is that this weapon could use the anima of its summoner. Therefore, without thinking twice, the man rushed straight at the monster and dealt him a crushing blow in several places at once. In this way, he used his anima and turned it into a destructive force. Such people were called fighting dolls, but this was a weapon of the rich, which was given only to the lucky ones, chosen by fate. Meanwhile, the man who was currently using the battle dolls seemed to have overdone it, and his assistant asked if it was time for him to stop since he had made too many summons. However, the man said that he will not stop until he gets the real prize. Moreover, he can buy as many summons as he wants. Destiny is a nice word used by those who can now afford it. But the protagonist was not one of those people. He had a terrible dream in which he called his father, but suddenly the main character opened his eyes and woke up in a cold sweat. He realized that he was in his own home, and was awakened by the loud sound of the alarm clock, which was lying at his feet. Soon the boy got out of bed, adjusted his armor and hair, and then left the house. Even though he didn't want to go anywhere, he knew he had to go to work. He walked down the street while other people discussed those who had been lucky enough to be called up. At that moment, he noticed an alert appearing in the sky directly above his head. It said that a new 5-star doll was available in an elite lottery, and he could enter for a chance to claim it for himself and begin his adventure. However, the main character was not interested in all this. He found it quite boring, since new models were constantly being released. He also knew that no one in this city had enough money to spend on such a thing. Soon after, he headed to the tavern where he worked. There were already a lot of visitors there, and the waiters kept asking them to wait because they couldn't serve everyone. At this moment, the main character was servicing the mechanical maid girl who stood in front of him. He thought to himself that the most he could find in this city was cheap service dolls. Suddenly a waiter came up to him and said that he needed the doll right now, and asked the main character if it was ready. After that, the guy took off his glasses and said that the anima core was broken and it was draining the doll's reservoir. However, the waiter didn't understand what this meant and asked the guy to just fix it, to which Cool replied that he needed a new part. Moreover, he said that he would have to pay for this part. The man looked at him with displeasure and said that they had not agreed on this. But Cool replied that he had said that he could only name an approximate price. In response to this, the man simply turned around and said that either he would fix the doll with what he had, or he would get nothing at all. The main character started to get angry. He understood that he couldn't afford this part, but he needed a job, so he thought of the only place where he could find a replacement. At that moment, an image of a place arose in his memory, in which a powerful explosion occurred, striking the entire space with a bright light. He remembered the grown man who had stood before him when Cool was still little, shielding him from the blast with his body. As it turned out, it was the little boy's father who sacrificed himself to save his son. However, the explosion was so strong that the boy's arm was injured. Thus, Cool was forced to replace his arm with a mechanical one, and now he often suffered ridicule from people who said that he was a doll who fixed dolls. These comments couldn't help but anger him, and so this time he decided to deal with those who mocked him. He walked up to the two men from behind and pretended to trip over something. He told them that they seemed to have dropped something, and at that moment he attached the mechanism to their chairs. After this, the main character smiled broadly, put some coins on the table, and said that this time he was treating them. The men were very happy that this doll finally understood who its owners really were, while Cool himself went to the exit, pleased with himself. Suddenly, men began to fall out of their chairs as if a small explosion had occurred beneath them. The bartender approached the bar counter and was surprised to see two men lying on the floor. Before leaving, the protagonist turned to the man and told him to prepare the money while he delivered the part. After some time, he headed towards the port where a lonely fisherman was sitting. It was Tom. He was a boatman, and also an acquaintance of the main character. When he saw Cool, he said that he did not expect to see him here. The guy explained to him that Eric's doll had broken again, and the bartender still couldn't learn how to take care of it. Then the boatman asked him why he took on any job and was in such a hurry to earn a lot of money. In response to this, the guy could not restrain himself and said that he had one duty, but a man should not worry about it. He then asked Tom how things were going, as he thought that few people went to the dump these days, to which Tom replied that it was true. Whatever treasures were there, they weren't worth digging through all the toxic garbage that was dumped from the capital. Hearing this, Cool sighed wearily, realizing that nothing had changed. The man then asked him if he was ready to sail. The protagonist looked at the horizon and noted that it was already a bit late. But he said that he could just take the boat and return it later if it would be more convenient for the man. Tom said that it sounded great, because old people like him were more relaxed about it. And he finally asked the boy not to forget to tie up the boat when he got back. He also asked the guy to leave money under the seat, which surprised Cool a lot, since he didn't expect to have to pay for it. However, he soon got into a boat and went to a huge dump. Cool walked around the horrible place, looking at the huge piles of garbage that surrounded him on all sides. Then he took out some mechanical part and thought that it might be worth some money. He knew it would take a lot of time, but in the end, he always found something useful in that trash heap. When evening came, Cool came to the conclusion that he had dug up a couple of useful parts, but he still had not found the anima core. Climbing up the mountain of trash, the hero thought to himself that if he knew anything about this place, it was that one could spend an eternity searching in these piles. And in the end, you can still only find a small part of what is hidden here. However, Cool did not despair. He decided that even if he could not find the anima core, he could renew his hand. While he was thinking that there was always something to be found in this dump, he didn't notice the hand sticking out of the pile of garbage. Suddenly, someone's hand grabbed his leg and began to pull him down. The main character stopped in surprise, and his find fell out of his hands. He also felt that he began to fall down. The guy didn't lose his composure and realized that he needed to break free from the grip of whoever had decided to grab him. However, he was not doing a good job of it, and his findings were flying even further away from him. Then the guy thought to himself that, apparently, there was someone alive here. Then he grabbed his leg and tried to pull it out of the hand that was holding it. At some point, he pulled out a person who was hiding in the trash, and it turned out that it was a young girl in a black suit. After that, Cool flew down to the very bottom of the dump, while the unfamiliar girl flew after him. When the main character looked at her, he could not understand what was happening, since the girl had her eyes closed. When he looked down, he realized that they were flying into the very abyss and could easily crash. He decided that he needed to save this girl, and so he abruptly took her hand. After that, Cool pressed her to himself, and they flew down together. With his mechanical hand, he covered her body from blows. After some time, they finally landed down, and their fall caused a loud explosion. When the dust finally settled, the protagonist was kneeling, holding a stranger in his arms. He looked at his mechanical arm and realized that he was feeling pain in it from the blow. However, after examining himself and the girl, he realized that everything could have ended much worse. The protagonist looked at the face of the stranger, who was still lying as if unconscious, and noted that she was quite lucky. After this, Cool brought her to his home and placed her on a vertical couch to examine her. The hero noted that he had found quite a few interesting things in this dump, but he had no idea that he had a chance to find an almost whole doll there. He once again carefully examined the mechanical girl, whose clothes were torn in several places, and she herself still had not regained consciousness. The main character thought to himself that he could earn a lot of money with this. However, he quickly dismissed these thoughts, as he realized that he didn't even know if it worked, since such a doll was clearly not thrown away without a reason. Its design was unfamiliar to him. He assumed it was some old model. It was made of a material Cool had never encountered, and it was much denser than the dolls he worked with. At this moment, the protagonist noticed that the girl was holding something in her hand. When he took it out, he realized that it was a small pawn covered in blood. When he thought that this was quite strange, a little blonde girl came up to him and asked why he thought it was strange. Cool, without thinking, replied that he had never seen anything like it. However, he suddenly realized that his younger sister Annie was standing next to him. He turned to her and asked her sharply how long she had been standing there, to which the girl replied discontentedly that she had been there for quite a long time. When the boy asked her what she was doing there, since her mother didn't like her leaving the house, the girl, with trembling legs, handed him a small toy bird. She said that her ponchi was broken again. Then the older brother came up to her, began to stretch her cheeks, and said that he asked her to take better care of him. However, Annie continued and asked her brother if he could fix her toy. The protagonist carefully examined the bird and said that, apparently, the internal mechanism was jammed, but there was nothing complicated here. The girl then pointed her finger at the doll that was placed on the couch, and asked her brother where he got this doll from. At one point, Annie assumed that he had won it in a lottery, but the protagonist said that he had found it in a dump, and the most surprising thing was that, despite some oddities, it was in good condition. When the girl asked what strange things he was talking about, he pointed to the anima core, which was located on the doll's chest. Soon the main character realized that his younger sister did not listen to him at all, and this made him angry every time. He explained again that anima is the energy that flows in all living beings, and it is this energy that is used to power technology, including dolls. The hero said that if we simplify everything as much as possible, we can say that this is how they set the dolls into action. He showed his sister the crystal core that allows the doll to accept anima and convert it into energy. Every doll has such a crystal. However, this doll has no crystal at all. It was raw ore. The main character has seen a lot of strange technologies in his life, but this one was amazing. At this point, Annie noticed the doll and noted that it looked just like a human. Cool then replied that the doll had a rather complex design. And then he tapped the crystal that was in her chest, and added that if it weren't for this thing, he would have definitely taken her for a human. However, the moment his finger collided with the crystal, a small bolt of lightning appeared between them. Suddenly, the main character looked down and noticed something amazing there, after which he asked his sister to look there. He said that even her toes were designed in such a way that they were indistinguishable from human ones. As the main character continued to talk about how amazing this doll was, which was clearly different from the usual ones made for service, his sister began to shake with fear. She said that this was all very strange. Suddenly she noticed that the doll opened its yellow eyes and looked away as if with displeasure. While Annie was horrified by the living doll, Cool continued to talk about how even the structure of her skeleton was completely correct. At this point, the previously silent doll finally spoke up, menacingly asking the boy what he was doing, and then placed her foot on his chest. The protagonist understood that the doll seemed confused, so he introduced himself by name and then asked her what her name was. However, instead of answering, the doll suddenly rushed at him, intending to hit him with its fist, but Cool managed to close himself in time. He thought to himself that he was lucky to block this blow. But he didn't understand why the first thing this doll did after waking up was to pounce on him. He began to think about how lucky he was to have found it, because no one else would ever be able to find cars in working condition, especially in a junkyard. While he was thinking about this, he did not notice that the doll grabbed him by the collar and threw him with all its force in the opposite direction. Cool then rubbed the back of his head where he had hit the wall and asked the doll to calm down for just a second, thinking to himself that it seemed like when he touched her, he had accidentally created an anima link and awakened her. However, when the hero came to his senses, he realized that the doll was now heading towards his younger sister. The girl sat near the wall and cried from fear, while the doll came closer and closer to her. At that moment, the doll activated her vision and realized that there was only a child in front of her. However, the protagonist felt that his sister was in danger, so he grabbed his desk and swung it to hit her. The blow was so strong that he knocked the doll off its feet, and then shouted at his sister to run away from there immediately. At this moment, Annie froze in place and watched what was happening in horror. The doll, apparently, was unhappy with this outcome of events. She let go of the little girl and then turned towards the boy, intending to take revenge on him. Cool thought to himself that this doll was too strong, and he needed to somehow stop her. Then he rushed at her, deciding that if he touched the tank, the connection would be broken. He reached out to touch the crystal that was located on the girl's chest with his fingers. However, at the last moment, the doll intercepted his hand, and then with all its strength threw him over itself and towards the work table. At that moment, Cool realized that he wouldn't be able to defeat her this way, and so he had to come up with something else. Then he suddenly came up with something and decided it might work. While the boy was lying on the floor, the doll approached him and gloomily asked him who he was and what he had done to her. The protagonist stood up to catch his breath, then quietly said that he was just fixing it. He explained that he found it in a dump and brought it here. After that, he raised his hands up and said that if she had any more questions, they could talk calmly. The doll thought to herself that this was some kind of nonsense. She didn't understand what she was doing at the dump and why she was thrown out. She didn't remember anything about it, but she decided to listen to the guy, since he had answers. Then she rushed straight towards the protagonist and stretched out her hand, intending to force him to tell everything he knew. At this point, the protagonist chuckled and said that this was his plan B. Suddenly, the doll noticed that some metal thing was approaching her from behind. The girl turned around and saw that the broken mechanical chair that had just been on the floor was flying towards her. At that moment, the doll realized that when Cool was on the floor, he must have installed something. Before she could do anything, her body was literally magnetized to the mechanical chair. After this, the main character was finally able to approach her and pointed his finger at her tank. At that moment, something strange flashed before the girl's eyes. She realized that she couldn't move, and she saw some silhouettes in front of her, but she couldn't make out their faces. At that moment, one man handed her a small pawn, but the girl did not understand what it was and what to do with this thing. Before she could do anything, the stranger left. She tried to stop him, but he seemed not to hear her. Soon she opened her eyes and saw in front of her the familiar silhouette of the guy with whom she had recently fought. Apparently, Cool was worried that he might have broken her. He assumed that the doll had simply switched off. Soon the girl finally opened her eyes and looked emotionlessly somewhere up. As it turned out, at that moment she was lying in the protagonist's workshop on one of his sofas. Taking advantage of the fact that he did not suspect anything, she suddenly jumped up from the sofa and rushed to the attack. Seeing this, the protagonist only sighed wearily, asking her if she was tired of starting all this again. He pressed a button on some small remote control, and at that moment the doll felt something start to squeak on her hand. Suddenly an invisible force pulled her back somewhere, and the girl could not resist it. In literally an instant, she found herself chained to the wall. Her hands, which had bracelets on them, were chained to mechanisms. While the girl was trying to escape, the main character approached her and told her to save her strength, since the magnetic lock would not break. At that moment, an enraged Annie entered the room and ordered her brother to stop, saying that he was just scaring the doll. She said that the doll almost let her go, but he interfered and ruined everything. But Cool insisted that the doll was trying to kill him. However, the younger sister did not want to listen to him. Instead, she went to the mechanisms and turned them off so that the doll's hands were free. Then she smiled at her and told the doll not to worry and that she could trust her. However, the main character was not satisfied with this outcome of events, and he chained the girl to the wall again. Annie looked at him angrily and asked why he did that, since she had just proven to him that the doll was not dangerous. However, Cool replied that he was not going to take any risks, and besides, he had to look after his little sister. The girl looked at him with displeasure, but she understood that she could do nothing in this situation. Eventually, the protagonist agreed to let the doll go, but said that if she tried to do anything again, he would not hesitate to activate the thing again. 3 hours later, the three of them gathered in a room to discuss what had happened, and it turned out that the doll really didn't remember anything. She said that the last thing she could remember was waking up here, but before that she only had partial memories. Then the hero asked her about her job function. He asked if she didn't remember who her summoner or master was. Even though at that moment the doll remembered the silhouette of the man in the cloak, she said that she did not remember any of it. The protagonist then suggested that she might have had her memory erased. He knew that some summoners wanted privacy, but erasing her memory completely sounded too much. His younger sister also thought that it was quite unfair. The doll replied that perhaps they had the cause and effect wrong. She suggested that she might have been thrown away because she had lost her memory, and not the other way around. Because if memory loss was a defect, then throwing her away would have been a logical decision. It seemed natural, getting rid of a faulty device. However, at this point Cool said that this was not natural, because if something is broken, it should be fixed, not thrown away. At this moment, the doll noticed that his hand was not his own. Annie then approached her, handing her the pawn they had found in her hand, and saying that perhaps if she saw something familiar, the memories would come back to her. After this, the doll took the strange figure in her hands and began to look at it in surprise. She understood that this was the thing that the mysterious man had given her, but she did not know what it could mean. When she said that she didn't recognize this thing, there was no surprise at all on the protagonist's face. And then he suddenly shouted and said that he was sure it wouldn't work because it would be too easy. The next day, he and the doll went to the town square, where there were quite a lot of people. He said that since she didn't remember anything about her past, they would have to do some digging. And the first stop would be a place where there should be information about her model type, functions, and possibly usage history. The girl looked at Cool in surprise and asked if he was really helping her. The boy replied that his little sister was furious, so he had to help the doll. The girl asked him why Annie didn't join them, to which the main character replied that it was quite a long story. After that, he smiled and asked if the girl found her new clothes comfortable. The doll looked closely at her new things and said that they partially restricted her movements. She thought that this was done on purpose so that she would not escape. When the protagonist heard this, he jumped away from her and asked if she was going to attack him again, but the doll said that she would not do that. Then Cool added that she wouldn't be able to go far, because her anima core was connected to him. However, the girl didn't even understand what he was talking about. However, soon the guy looked up and said that they had arrived at the right place. In front of them stood a huge building. The Adventurers Guild. The main character said that they had the largest archive in the whole country, and information about the doll would surely be found here. However, Cool said he should go in there alone, as the recordings were not available to the general public. Then he walked towards the building and asked the doll to wait for him a little. When the main character left, the girl leaned her back against the wall and began to look at nature. At that moment, she heard someone's loud laughter and turned her head towards the sound. She saw a large man with blonde hair walking down the street. carrying a huge sack on his back. The man was smiling and telling everyone that the quest was too easy. As it turned out, he was an adventurer named Toppa. However, everyone was happy that he had come to town again. They considered him just a brat of a rich merchant. At this moment, the doll noticed that the bag that Toppa was carrying on his shoulders was bloody. Suddenly, the person walking behind the man noticed a doll standing nearby. He noted that this was the first time he had seen this doll here and suggested that it might be a service doll. However, when he looked at her eyes, the guy realized that her eyes were too lively for a service doll. As he passed the stranger, he wondered who could be her summoner. Meanwhile, the main character entered the guild building, where he was greeted by the girl behind the counter. The girl with red hair smiled at him, greeted him and asked how she could help him. However, when she realized that Cool was standing in front of her, her face immediately changed and she snorted in displeasure. Apparently, she was unhappy that her old friend had not come to see her for a whole month. But the main character apologized and said that he was very busy, since he had a lot of part-time jobs. Then the girl showed him indulgence and asked what he was doing there. The guy replied with a smile on his face that he had a small request, but the girl immediately refused him. This immediate refusal made the protagonist very angry, and he asked her why she was so stubborn, because she constantly asked him to fix her things, and now she refused him when he needed a little help. In response, the girl said that Cool couldn't just barge in here, ignoring her for an eternity, and expect her to go out of her way for him. At that moment, their conversation was interrupted by the same man, who loudly slammed his fist on the table and said that he needed a guild worker. The girl immediately turned to him and asked how she could help him, but in fact she was unhappy that this guy had come again. At that moment, Toppa put his huge bag, which he carried on his back, on the table, and said that he had come here to receive a reward for this. When he cut the bag, everyone present saw a huge beast there, which looked like a bear, with horns instead of ears, and spikes on its back. Everyone present was shocked when they realized that in front of them lay a Titan-class magical beast that was worth no less than 1,000 coins. At this moment, the main character noticed that there was a large burn wound on the animal's belly. Cool looked at the man carefully and began to wonder what kind of weapon could have caused such a wound and what this guy was hiding. Meanwhile, the doll stood near the guild building and thought that in this building, according to that guy, there might be information about her past. She wondered if they knew who the man with the bloody pawn was. At that moment, everyone present in the building was shocked by what a huge beast Toppa had brought them this time. The man was pleased that such attention was being paid to his person. However, the protagonist continued to speculate about what kind of weapon could have caused such a wound. Then the man raised his axe and said that it had been a dangerous battle. But the beast was no match for his mighty battle axe, which was called the Heartbreaker. It was created by the greatest weaponsmiths in the world, and had no equal. At this point the girl said that she didn't care at all how he killed it, but she wanted him to remove that thing from the table. At that moment, the man leaned towards her and said that he would like her to join him on the quest and see his weapon in action, or they could have some privacy. The girl protested inside, but she knew she had to remain polite, and so she modestly declined. Then Toppa raised his weapon and moved closer to the girl, saying that he was a good guy. At this point, the protagonist intervened in the conversation. He said that at first glance the axe seemed to be made of high-quality steel, but it was completely obvious to him that it was simply covered with stereo silver for appearance's sake, to get such a shine. Cool said he could see areas where the cheap steel wasn't coated properly. In response, the man only laughed and said that an ordinary crippled peasant could not know anything about weapons of this class. The protagonist confirmed that he was indeed not an expert, but he did not know of any axe that could leave burns. At that moment, the man felt that he was being exposed. People behind his back began to whisper that they suspected that he had not killed the beast himself. They said that he was as stupid as he was rich. These words made Toppa very angry, and he rushed at the protagonist, swinging his axe. However, Cool simply held his mechanical arm out in front of him and easily blocked his blow. The man watched in horror as his axe shattered into pieces upon impact with the mechanical arm. The protagonist noted that situations like this had been happening too often lately, and he thanked himself for strengthening his arm after the doll's attack. At that moment, Toppa turned to his doll named Grizz, who was standing behind him, and ordered him to immediately deal with this guy. Hearing this, Grizz sighed and said that he could just sit back and relax. He then prepared his weapon and added that they would finish this as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, the doll continued to wait for its comrade outside the building. Suddenly, she heard a powerful explosion that came from the building and knocked down the doors. The girl was horrified when she saw her friend Cool fly out of the building and fall straight to the ground. However, the guy said that he was completely fine. His arm took most of the damage. However, he suddenly realized that his legs were still unprotected and were now burnt. When the doll looked at the destroyed exit of the building, she saw the outline of a silhouette moving towards them. As it turned out, it was Grizz. He was a battle doll of an unusual class, who was now annoyed that his new cloak was damaged. When the protagonist looked up at him, he couldn't believe his eyes. He had never seen them before. But there was no doubt that this doll had an anima core and could create fire. When Grizz looked at the people standing outside, he saw the same doll that he had noticed shortly before. At that moment, Toppa approached him and asked why he still hadn't killed this guy. In response, the doll only sighed in displeasure, since she was tired of this overly talkative man. However, she was forced to obey his orders, so she rushed forward, saying that it was time to end this. The main character thought to himself that he would never be able to cope with this doll. Just when he decided it was time for them to get out of here, he saw his doll running straight towards the enemy. Grizz struck her with his weapon, but the girl deftly jumped away from him. Instead, she jumped to the other side and grabbed the handle of his weapon. Taking advantage of Grizz's confusion, she jumped up and kicked him right in the face. After that, she snatched the weapon from his hands and threw the doll back. Everyone present, as well as Grizz himself, were shocked by what they had just seen. Moreover, the girl herself did not understand how she had just been able to perform this trick. At that moment, a man in glasses was watching them from above, from the top floor of the building, and, apparently, he was pleased with how this battle was going. The main character was in shock. He did not understand how the girl managed to cope with such a powerful doll. Suddenly, she saw a strange glow in front of her, which was quickly approaching her. She looked down and saw a streak of fiery energy in front of her that literally cut her in half. As it turned out, Grizz was able to intercept his weapon and now rushed to attack again. However, the girl still managed to dodge and jumped back. She knew to herself that her body had just moved on its own, as if she had been created for this. At this point, Grizz approached her and asked why she didn't use her craft if she was a combat doll. He said angrily that if she thought she could win without it, she better think again. He then began to relentlessly attack the doll from different angles, and the girl had to constantly dodge. She saw that Grizz's eyes were literally burning with red fire. He was furious. After that, he struck a blow that was his firecraft. It was called the Flame Sickle. The main character, who was watching everything that was happening, was horrified. He was sure that the doll would not be able to cope with such a powerful attack. Then he rushed to his girlfriend and ordered her to get out of there immediately. However, the girl continued to stand in place. Something inside her said that she would definitely be able to stop this attack. Suddenly her eyes started to glow with a bright yellow light. And then something strange happened. She felt as if she was in zero gravity, and behind her was that same stranger in a hood who said goodbye to her, calling her by name, Annika. The doll quickly returned to reality, and realized that a huge blast wave was approaching her. Meanwhile, Cool was approaching the doll, intending to save it. He reached out his hand to take it from there. However, suddenly Annika felt that a sphere similar to a bright pearl appeared in front of her. Before she could even realize it, it was as if a large water bubble had enveloped her. As it turns out, it was a watercraft called Ocean Pearl that saved the doll from the attack. Everyone present was shocked by what they saw, as they realized that this was outside interference. Soon a woman with glasses and long blue hair came out to them. It was a normal class battle doll named Kalia. She was also the assistant of the guild leader. She turned to the guys and said that this was quite a big violation, and now she would have to do a lot of paperwork. When the red-haired girl saw this, she cursed at her friend, as she realized that she was in trouble because of him. She was sure that this incident would get her fired. Then Kalia turned to the protagonist and the doll, and said that if her information was correct, and it always was, the two of them did not have a license, meaning they were on the guild's territory illegally. Cool and Annika looked at the woman in surprise, but they knew she was telling the truth. Then the woman smiled slyly and asked them to leave the area immediately, otherwise they would be forced to take action. The protagonist then pointed towards Toppa and said that this man provoked them, to which the man replied that he was simply protecting the guild from an intruder. Kalia replied that since Toppa was a member of the Adventurers Guild, any disciplinary action against him would be considered a private matter of the guild, so it was none of their business. However, the protagonist was terrified that this guy would just be let go without question. In response to this, the man laughed. He said that on his side there was an entire guild, and on Cole's side there was only a cheap, terrible doll. The main character was very angry when he heard these words, but he knew what to answer. He looked at the man's broken axe and said that he should come over to him if he didn't want to be sold a fake again. At the end, he said that he would even give him a discount, but Toppa replied that he was not going to ask him for help. After that, he walked up to Annika, put his hand on her shoulder, and said that they needed to get out of here. Just as they were about to leave, they heard someone calling them. It turned out to be Grizz, who turned to Annika and said that she was moving quite well. Then he noticed that she moved well for a broken doll. And then a look of irritation appeared on the girl's face. While the guys were walking along the road, the main character said that in the end they couldn't find out anything. They still had zero guesses about where Annika could have come from. But the girl replied that in fact this was not the case. She explained that she remembered something. It was the image of a man who knew her and called her by name. When she told the protagonist her name, he said that it suited her very well. Annika then asked him to tell her what the battle dolls were, since Grizz mentioned them during the battle. At this point, Cool realized that the girl didn't know about regular old service dolls. He said that they were usually used for light tasks like cooking and cleaning, and that was literally all their cores were capable of. However, a few years ago, a brilliant engineer created a new core. It was so powerful that it allowed control of anima. But Annika still didn't understand, and then the hero remembered how he tried to explain this to his sister. But now he realized that it wouldn't hurt for this girl to learn the basics too. He asked the doll to listen to him very carefully, as it was very important that she know this. He said that anima is the energy that flows through the whole world. She connects all things together, and without anima everything would turn to dust. All people are born with an anima center through which they can use it, but their ability to control it is limited. However, this changed with the creation of dolls. Autonomous creations that can use the summoner's anima. When it comes to dolls, they can literally control her. They can change and search for the summoner's anima. They can then manifest it as destructive power. Now anyone can use the infinite potential of anima, as long as they have money and luck on their side. Then the girl turned to the guy and asked him if there was a chance that she was a fighting doll. After thinking for a moment, Cool replied that this was impossible, as combat dolls had only been invented a few years ago using advanced technology. However, Annika was working on technology that was practically Stone Age, and after saying this, the hero pointed to the reservoir on her chest. The girl then suggested that they could take out her core and replace it with one belonging to a combat doll. However, the protagonist replied that it was not that simple. The core had to be compatible with the doll. An ordinary core of a service doll would not power a combat doll even in a million years. And if you put a core of a combat doll into an ordinary doll, you could run into big trouble. He explained that some people had tried to do this. There were rumors of fools trying to upgrade a cheap service doll with a combat core. There is probably only one person in the entire world who knows how the cores of the battle dolls work, and he was paid well to keep it a secret. When Annika heard this, sadness and disappointment appeared on her face. At this point, Cool still didn't understand why someone would create a doll with such primitive methods, and if it was an experiment, then why bother with clearing the memory? Then he smiled at his companion and said that perhaps Annie would give them some ideas. He had never told her this, but she could be a good conversationalist. Then the doll smiled back at the guy and said that he takes very good care of his sister. The main character was surprised where the doll got such thoughts, to which she replied that it was just an observation. He had no reason to help Annika except for Annie's requests. The protagonist said that she rarely leaves the house. In a sense, she lives her life through her older brother. And even so, he can tell that she does not want to be a burden. So if there is something that she really wants, then he was sure that it is very important to her. Then Annika suggested that the main character was like a doll for his brother, but he replied that this was not entirely true. After some time, they reached Cool's house, and at that moment, he noticed that the door to their house was open. The guy sensed something was wrong and looked through the open door, and what he saw there shocked him. He saw his little sister lying unconscious on the floor, with her toy lying next to her. Annika was also shocked by what she saw and asked what happened to the girl. Cool immediately ran to his sister, picked her up from the floor and tried to bring her to her senses, but he was unsuccessful. He noticed that her toy was lying on the floor broken. Some of its feathers had fallen out of its frame. After some time, a doctor came to them. The girl's mother was unhappy because her daughter felt so bad, and the doctors could not help her, despite the fact that they knew that she was sick. Then the man said that one of the healers could understand what was wrong with their daughter, but the price for the examination would be high. The protagonist, who was sitting on a chair at the time, noted with displeasure that everything always came down to money, and then asked how much they needed to pay. The man said it was not easy to say because there were many factors that influenced the price. However, Cool did not want to listen to this. He firmly asked the man how much exactly we needed to pay. Soon after, the doctor left their house, and the protagonist and his mother went outside to say goodbye to him. Suddenly, the main character turned to his mother and asked her for forgiveness. He said that Annie shouldn't have stayed in his workshop. It was too hard for her there, and therefore her current state was his fault. The woman sat down on the bench and hugged her son. She told him not to talk like that, because it was he who brought the girl home and ran to look for a doctor. The woman said that it was Cool who saved his little sister. After that, she turned away and looked at the night sky with a smile on her face. The woman said that at such moments she dreams that his father is with them again. The protagonist asked her if she thought he would know exactly what to do, but the woman said that he couldn't know, but he would definitely help them not to lose heart. Meanwhile, Annika was waiting for the main character in the workshop. She began to worry when she realized that he had been gone for a long time. However, at that moment he entered the room, but there was absolutely no emotion on his face. The doll asked him how his sister was doing, to which Cool replied that she still hadn't woken up. The local doctor didn't know what was wrong with her. The only way to help Annie was to take her to the doctor in the capital. The doll suggested that in that case they should immediately go to the capital, but Cool said that it was not that simple. When the girl said that she didn't see any problems, since Annie needed help first, the main character couldn't hold back and punched the wall. He said that the journey to the capital would be very expensive, not to mention the doctor. He had saved money for years, and still it was a mere pittance from the required amount. His little sister's heart is failing and her body is literally falling apart because of it. The main character couldn't even imagine how much pain she was in now and how much strength she needed to continue smiling. It was all because of him. He had to take care of her like her older brother. When he realized that he had been overly emotional, he apologized to Annika and said that he did not expect her to understand him. The main character then noted that in truth, people and dolls are not so different. He said that both a person and a doll are very easy to break and very expensive to fix. After that, he headed towards the exit of the workshop, and the girl ran after him. As soon as the main character found himself outside, he ran forward, despite the fact that there was a heavy downpour. Cool thought to himself that he should have expected this. The money he received for the repairs did not bring him one step closer to his goal. He thought that in this world there was only one way to make a lot of money. After some time, he reached the guild, looking at the building. The guy realized that he should become an adventurer. He then went to the front desk and said he wanted a quest and was willing to do anything. But the girl told him they only gave out quests to licensed adventurers. When the main character heard this, he began to cry in despair and begged the girl to give him at least some kind of quest. At that moment, Kalia entered the building and asked what was going on. She turned to the guy and said that he could ask her any questions personally. When the protagonist recognized her as the guild leader's doll, he said that he wanted to apply for an adventurer's license. Then Kalia replied that unfortunately, she had to refuse him and asked if he needed anything else. Hearing such an answer, the main character got angry. He asked on what grounds they were refusing me, to which the doll replied that the director had arranged for him and his doll to somehow participate in the affairs of the guild. The protagonist stated that it was all a lie, to which the girl said that even if it was, nothing would have changed if he had any questions. She added that he could send a letter to the support department, but for now she would ask him to leave the mission. After that, she smiled slyly and asked if he really wanted her to walk him home. At this moment, the hero began to think about what to do, because if he did not have a license, he would not be able to help his sister. Meanwhile, Kalia was still pointing him towards the exit, but at that moment, Cool noticed something on the table. He decided to walk past the doll and asked her to slowly lead him to the principal, saying that she would make him change his mind. However, the doll grabbed his hand, stopping him, and in her other hand began to form a pearl. Then she abruptly turned him around to face the table and slammed his face into the furniture with all her might. Meanwhile, the girl at the reception desk watched everything that was happening in horror. Kalia turned to the protagonist with a smile and asked if he really thought he could become an adventurer at his current level. She laughed and said she hadn't even used her craft yet. She then pointed to his mechanical arm and said that it was a burden and could easily be broken. The doll said that Cool would become useless, unable to help, and dead in literally a second. However, the protagonist stated that he agreed with this. He said that Kalia knew someone she could say the same thing to. It was a girl who had been hurt and weak, but she kept fighting day after day, and if the protagonist didn't do the same for her, then it would be better for him to just die. At this moment, the doll was very surprised by such words and even let go of the main character. After a while, he left the guild and headed back in the rain. The doll watched him go, thinking that at first glance this guy seemed completely ordinary. However, the moment he said the words that he would rather die, she became truly scared. However, the girl quickly decided that she had simply imagined it, and decided not to attach any importance to it. After that, she turned to the worker and asked her to clean up everything here before the director arrived. After this, Kalia suddenly noticed the paper that was lying on the floor. When she read its contents, she decided that it was impossible. After some time, the main character returned to his home and was met by a surprised Annika. She asked him what happened to him. Covered in bruises, the protagonist smiled and said that it was nothing. He then showed her a document that was an adventurer's license, and stated that they were now going on a quest. They walked through the forest all night, and at some point Anika felt like she was starting to get tired. But Cool said that they were almost there. However, he said that she did not have to help him, and if she wanted she could return. But the girl replied that now Cool was her summoner, and their destinies were connected. However, the girl doubted that she would be of any use, since her abilities were questionable and she could not control the anima. However, the hero said that she fought on equal terms with a battle doll without using an element, so it would be foolish of him not to take her with him. Anika suggested that he wasn't concerned about her survival. He didn't buy or invest in her future, so if she fell into disrepair it wouldn't matter to him. But the hero said that wasn't what he meant. Then the girl decided to ask him if he was sure that it was worth taking such a risk, because there must be other ways to make money. The protagonist replied that a quest is the fastest and most profitable way, especially if it is in a dungeon. If they are lucky, they will find something valuable there. The hero realized to himself that his sister was getting worse with every minute, and he would have liked to choose any other option. But he needed the money as soon as possible. After some time they reached a cave that looked like the mouth of a monster. At that moment, Anika thought about how right they were doing, because they didn't know what to expect inside, and without knowledge and her ability, everything could turn out very badly. However, the main character had no intention of retreating and called the girl with him. Anika was unhappy that this guy did whatever he wanted. She doubted whether he was really that brave or just a fool. But then she suddenly grinned, as she realized that this gave him strength. Then she decided to follow the main character into the sinister cave. When they got inside, it was very dark, so Cool took a flashlight out of his pocket. The girl asked what the description of his quest was, to which the hero said that there was none. Everything was very vague. It said that a dungeon was found, and materials had to be obtained from there. Then the doll asked him if they had enough skills to defend themselves from the enemies here. She said that out of all the weapons in his workshop, this one was the most convenient. To which the hero replied that everything would be fine, because it was only a C-rank quest. And besides, he had a few tricks up his sleeve, including the thing he had already mentioned. The doll understood that he was talking about the prototype, but said that it would be foolish to trust her life to a thing that was assembled from who knows what. As they walked forward through the cave, a strange creature that looked like an eye looked down at them. Cool replied to his companion that perhaps they would not need her. He pointed to the walls and said that the creatures here should not pose a danger. However, Anika wondered why she couldn't shake off the feeling that she had if it was just a C-rank quest. She assumed it was because it was her first quest, or it was someone from her past warning her. Soon they reached a wall that looked like a human skull. There was a fork in the road, and the guys couldn't figure out where they should go. Suddenly the main character noticed a strange creature that looked like an eye with fluffy eyelashes. Even though it seemed pretty disgusting to Cool, he still decided to try it. At that moment, the doll turned her gaze in that direction and at some point froze in horror. Meanwhile, Cool was busy looking at the strange creature. He assumed that it was some kind of unusual parasitic creature, but at that moment the girl asked him to turn around. When the main character turned to her, he froze in fear for a few moments. As it turned out, the entire ceiling of this cave was covered with these creatures that looked like eyes, and they were all looking at the main character and his companion. The doll pulled out her sword, ready to repel the attack at any moment, while the protagonist tried to understand what kind of creatures these were. Then they saw wings coming out of the creature's eyes, and then heads came out of them, and then they realized that these were the same man-eyed bats. This animal got its name from the corresponding organ on its back, which was able to detect anima. When someone encroached on their territory, the entire colony would attack the intruder. The protagonist looked at the whole flock of bats that were flying towards them and noted that this colony was incredibly large. Something was definitely wrong here. He turned to the doll and told her to be careful, while Anika tried to fight off the bats attacking them. She struck them relentlessly, and in one instant she cut down 10 monsters at once. She thought to herself that her instincts had not failed her. This sword seemed to be made for her, but something was definitely wrong. The protagonist was so distracted by watching the battle that he didn't notice how one of the bats landed on his shoulder and bit him. Suddenly, the rest of the bats rushed straight towards him, and the main character tried unsuccessfully to fight them off with his hands. When the doll saw this, she immediately rushed to his aid. However, suddenly she felt a strange sensation, as if pain had pierced her entire body. In just one instant, she fell to her knees and realized that she could not move. Meanwhile, Cool tried to fight off the monsters attacking him with the help of his mechanical arm. He was able to deal with several monsters at once, but there were too many of them. He knew he had to somehow get rid of them in one fell swoop. The guy was a little upset, because he wanted to save this skill for a more serious battle. but he understood that now he would not survive without it. He used a small disc and threw it towards the bats. When a certain symbol appeared on the disc, Cool shouted at his partner to lie down on the ground immediately. At that moment, a powerful explosion was heard in the air, which caused dozens of huge lightning bolts to strike directly at the bats. After some time, the explosion finally died down, and then the guys were able to get up from the ground. They looked around and saw the burnt corpses of the monsters. At that moment, Anika looked thoughtfully at the glowing thing she was holding in her hand. The main character approached her, breathed a sigh of relief, and asked if everything was okay with her. The doll replied that when the bat bit the protagonist, their connection was almost broken. It was feeding on her anima. Cool replied that he noticed this. His head was still splitting in pain. The girl began to wonder what had attracted such a large colony if these monsters were attracted to anima. The hero assumed that it must have been something powerful, and it was most likely at the end of these tunnels. However, they still couldn't figure out which tunnel they should go into. And even before Anika asked this, the protagonist already understood what plan they needed. Then he pointed to one of the tunnels and said that they needed to go there. The girl immediately asked him why he decided that this was the right choice. However, Cool couldn't explain it, he was just sure of it. He knew that there was something there that could change everything. Soon the boys came out into another part of the cave, which was very different from the narrow dark passages they had seen before. In front of them was a wall, in the center of which was a statue of a woman who was emitting an incredibly bright light. When the protagonist looked at the pendant that hung on the statue's neck, he realized that his whole life up to this moment would become just a memory for him. For some time the boys stood silently and looked at the incomprehensible structure in front of them. Anika began to think that the uneasiness she felt at the entrance to the cave came from here. Then the main character pointed her in the direction of the statue, which was located at a fairly decent height. What interested him most was the pendant that hung around the stone woman's neck. He assumed that this was the thing that attracted the bats here, but the girl did not understand why they needed this trinket. The protagonist suggested that the stone in this pendant could have been infused with anima. However, he understood that for a colony of such size, its concentration must be incredible. Such an artifact should have been guarded much more diligently. After this, the main character squatted down and decided to touch the water with his hand, which was right in front of him. He looked at her carefully, and then declared that she was safe. Anika looked at the pendant and said that she would get the stone from there. But Cool stopped her and said that he would go there himself, and she should stay here. The doll tried to stop him, saying it was dangerous, but the guy said the stone might have some effect on the doll, and he didn't want to risk it suddenly turning off. Plus, Anika was faster than him. If some kind of defense worked, she would cope with it better than he could. Then he smiled and asked the girl if she would agree to cover for him. The doll looked at him in bewilderment, but agreed with his plan. She looked towards the glowing statue again, and said that she would definitely protect him. Meanwhile, the story moves to the guild. Kalia was sitting at the table in the office and thinking about the fact that the head had gone to sleep a few hours ago, and she was busy with his work. She decided that she would definitely need to talk about this. However, at that moment someone knocked on her door. As it turned out, it was the worker who had recently met the main character. She said that she checked all the available quests, as the doll asked, and as she suspected, one was missing. Kalia realized that her guess was correct. That boy had probably taken that quest with him. But the only relief was that the quests in the main hall were no higher than C rank. Afterwards, the girl said that they were lucky that Kalia decided to schedule a check. At that moment, the doll suspected something and asked her why she decided so. The girl explained that she had checked the guild's initial rating for this dungeon quest when it first appeared, and it turned out that it had been assigned the wrong rank. Meanwhile, the main character stepped into the water, which was located right in front of the stairs. As it turned out, the quest he was currently on was rated incorrectly due to its description. It was actually an S-rank dungeon. However, the protagonist did not know about this, and continued to climb the wall without fear to reach the statue. When he looked at the statue, he realized something. From a distance he hadn't noticed it, but now he realized that the statue looked as if it were a woman mourning a loss. And at that moment, Kalia jumped up from her seat. She was horrified when she found out that this dungeon was S-rank. She immediately ran out of the office and ordered the girl to form a squad from those who were free right now. If that guy had already entered there, they might not make it in time. Meanwhile, Anika tried to carry out her part of the plan, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong here. She thought this artifact was quite strange. The main character felt it too. He felt the pressure coming from this artifact, which made his head spin. It felt like his body was completely disobeying him. However, Cool knew he couldn't do otherwise and was determined to get through it no matter what. So he stretched out his arm with all his might and grabbed the pendant. After that, he immediately jumped back into the water. Meanwhile, the doll looked around for anything unusual, After some time, the main character climbed out of the water and asked her if she noticed anything, but the girl said that nothing was visible yet. When the boy looked at the amulet he was holding in his hand, he realized that the pressure that was coming from it had disappeared. He then climbed back up the stairs with the help of his partner and smiled and remarked that they were really lucky. However, then they suddenly heard a strange sound, as if something had fallen into the water. When the boys looked up, they saw that the statue of the woman was beginning to crack and collapse. In literally one moment it cracked completely and began to fall down along with the wall. What followed was a powerful explosion that left nothing behind from the structure that had been there just a minute ago. Annika and her partner watched what was happening with curiosity, and soon they noticed a strange figure that was visible through the clouds of dust. They saw a demonic green hand that began to crawl out of the rocks, and then part of the monster's face appeared from there. The doll asked the main character what it was, but Cool himself did not know what to answer her. Soon a monster appeared before them, which looked like a huge lizard, but was much more terrible than any of them. He quickly dived under the water, and literally a moment later appeared right in front of the guys. Without thinking twice, Annika used her sword and rushed to attack. In one movement, she dealt him powerful blows all over his body. However, when she heard a strange sound behind her, she immediately turned around. As it turned out, her attacks didn't work, and the monster took absolutely no damage. Meanwhile, the main characters looked at this monster with horror on their faces. It was the shadow of a witch. He had only heard of them in legends. Even the most high-class adventurers avoid the dungeons guarded by this monster, so Cool didn't understand where it came from. When the main character looked closely, he realized that the monster's gaze was directed at the amulet that he was holding in his hand. As soon as the guy realized what exactly the monster wanted from them, he immediately ran away. He thought he was running fast enough, but soon enough he heard the scream of a monster behind him. As it turned out, the shadow was already right in the middle of him, and was preparing to strike him with its clawed paw. At this moment, the main character realized that this monster was not affected by physical attacks. However, he still had a plan B, and decided to create some explosions. He used several mechanisms and threw them straight towards the shadow, and soon a powerful explosion was heard there. The protagonist watched the explosion with anticipation, hoping that he had succeeded. The explosion was so powerful that it raised a lot of dust, and therefore Cool could hardly see anything. However, a monster soon appeared in front of him, using shadow shift skills and deforming its body. He then extended his demonic hand in front of him and grabbed the protagonist right by the neck. She came so close to him that Cool could feel her ominous breath right on his face. Then the shadow raised its hand to the amulet, which he was clutching in his palm, and frantically repeated that it belonged to her. The main character was horrified when he realized that this monster could talk. Shadow was so distracted by trying to get the amulet out of Cool's hand that she didn't notice Annika approaching her from behind. The doll dealt him a crushing blow, thereby cutting off the shadow's hand. The monster screamed loudly from the intense pain and then jumped to the side, deforming its body again. After that, Annika helped the main character to get up, and then the guy asked her how she knew that she would succeed this time. However, the girl simply shrugged, saying that she was simply hoping for the best. Quite quickly the guys came to their senses and realized that they would have to somehow defeat this monster, which apparently could regenerate. The main character noted that he did something to burn it when he held it by the neck. He suggested that this was what made him vulnerable. Annika said that it made sense, but it still wasn't the plan. The protagonist agreed with her. They could have fought for days, but they still weren't close to destroying this monster. The way it transforms suggests that it is a shadow, most likely made entirely of anima. At that moment, a brilliant idea came to Cool's head. He turned to Annika and said that it was time to use that very thing. Meanwhile, the shadow approached them, continuing to talk about how this thing belonged to her, and asking the guys why they didn't want to return it to her. Without thinking twice, she rushed at the main character, who was still holding that amulet in his hand. However, it turned out that during this time he had hung the amulet around Annika's neck, and now she was to become the shadow's target. As soon as the shadow sensed that its amulet was now on another person, it immediately changed its target. At this point, the doll was trying her best to hope that this plan would work. The main character thought to himself that they would succeed, but he just needed a little time. Meanwhile, the shadow attacked the doll, trying to strike with its hands, which now resembled sickles. However, the girl easily dodged each blow. At that moment, new limbs seemed to grow from behind the monster's back, and he directed all 3 limbs at the girl at once. Annika realized that these attacks were too fast, and she began to have difficulty dodging them in time. At some point, she noticed that one of the monster's tentacles had landed right where she had been a moment ago. When the girl looked up, she realized that there were 3 demonic spikes sticking out of the ground, preventing her from getting out of this cage. She realized she had lost sight of the monster, but then a shadow appeared from the ground and struck her in the face. After this, the shadow prepared to attack the doll from above, and Anika turned to the protagonist and asked how much more time he needed. Meanwhile, Cool was working on creating some kind of mechanism and frantically answered the girl that he only had a little bit left. Suddenly, the shadow grabbed Anika by the neck and squeezed tightly, causing the girl to feel a strong burning sensation. However, she then took out her sword and cut off the hand that was holding her neck again. After this, the girl pounced on the shadow again and was about to attack it from above. Suddenly, the monster grabbed the blade of Anika's weapon and looked at her with what seemed like a victorious smile. In literally one instant, her weapon cracked into 100 tiny pieces. The girl had no choice but to step back. She looked at her broken sword and then at the protagonist, who was still trying to put his plan into action. She remembered a situation that had happened shortly before. The protagonist created a small thing that, according to him, was supposed to help them clear the dungeon. However, Anika replied that the device looked just like his other toys, and that it brought back unpleasant memories for her. The main character did not like this comment at all, because in his eyes this device looked completely different. He said that in the center was a crystal core that he extracted from a damaged maintenance doll. He was able to use its anima-holding properties in one of his explosive discs. The girl realized that it could now actually resist attacks involving anima. Cool confirmed her words and said that no matter what they had to face in that dungeon, they were prepared. However, the girl decided to be frank. She said that he was going into the dungeon with no experience at all, and taking a broken doll with him, so the odds were not in his favor, and his confidence bordered on arrogance. However, the guy said that he was not very confident in his abilities either. He scratched his face awkwardly and said that he couldn't feel his hand, and that his heart was about to jump out of his chest. Also, his legs had been shaking ever since they left that guild. However, he still understood that his sister was suffering, and he was her older brother, so he saw no point in hesitating in the face of danger when it was the only way out. Cool stated that this anima destroyer had only one drawback, which was the preparation time, so the girl would have to cover him while he filled the core. He said that he would give her a command, and then she would have to try to run as far away as possible, and remember that this device explodes. Meanwhile, Anika continued to fight the monster, which was superior to her in every way. As she ran towards him again, the shadow used a skill called Shadow Shift and deformed its body again. Her body turned into a long whip, which she aimed straight at Anika. The girl barely managed to dodge this attack, as it was circular. Then she turned to Cool and asked him again how much more time he needed. The guy thought to himself that he had no strength left. He was not used to spending so much anima at once, but he needed to make sure that he was charged enough and could kill the shadow. However, if they hesitate, they will miss their only chance. So the main character decided to take a risk and gave his partner the command to run. As soon as Anika heard this, she immediately jumped away from the tentacles that were chasing her. Then the main character put his hand in front of him and prepared to use the device. However, at the last moment he noticed that the timer on his device seemed to have broken and was now showing only zeros. He assumed it happened when his belt fell to the ground. The girl looked at Cool in surprise and asked him why he didn't throw the device, to which the guy said that he wouldn't be able to do it and he would have to detonate it manually. At that moment the girl told him to be careful. As it turned out, a shadow had fallen on him and the device had fallen out of his hand. The protagonist put his iron hand in front of him to block the fiery attack of this monster. He frantically looked around, trying to find the destroyer of the anima with his gaze. Then he noticed that Anika approached the device and picked it up, despite the fact that it was glowing and ready to explode. Without thinking twice, she rose to her feet and headed straight towards the shadow. Meanwhile, the monster continued to strike one blow after another, trying to break through the main character's mechanical arm. The guy didn't understand what to do. He realized that he needed to activate the device now, while this shadow was vulnerable. At that moment, the monster heard footsteps behind him and turned around to see what was there. As it turned out, Anika was standing behind him, holding a device in one hand and the very amulet that the monster was hunting for in the other. Cool looked at the girl with fear in his voice and asked her what she was doing. Then the doll looked at the shadow defiantly and said that if he wanted to take this thing, then he should come to her and try to do it. Without thinking twice, the monster rushed straight towards the girl, putting his clawed paws in front of him. Anika realized that her plan had worked and then held the amulet in front of her, saying that she was not going anywhere. At that moment, the main character rushed after the monster, not fully believing that the girl wanted to blow up this device herself. Before doing this, Anika remembered the words of the protagonist that there is no point in hesitating in the face of danger, if this is the only way out. At that moment, Cool realized what the girl was about to do and ordered her to stop. However, Anika did not stop. She said with a smile on her face that this was the only way out. After that, she closed her eyes and concentrated, clutching that very amulet in her hand. Literally a moment later, there was a powerful explosion that destroyed the shadow in a couple of seconds. The protagonist was trying to get to his partner when he suddenly saw her body, which was standing in the blast wave, but looked undamaged. The explosion was so strong that the guy had to shield himself from it with his hands. After some time, when it finally settled, he began to come to his senses. The first thing the main character did was get to his feet and go looking for his companion. He saw Annika sitting near the stone. He said that he could not understand that she activated the device manually, and called her crazy. However, he was glad that their plan worked, and the shadow eventually disappeared. But still, when Cool approached Annika, she quietly asked him why he did it. Half of her face was damaged. She looked at the guy with disappointment, and asked him why he let her do this. She stood up and asked if she really was just expendable to him. The main character, looking at his companion, froze in horror. He promised that he would definitely fix her. However, when he looked down, he realized that a dark spot was growing under his feet. The protagonist did not understand what was happening. While the spot stopped, grew larger, and began to surround him from all sides. Suddenly he heard a familiar voice and turned around to see who it was. He saw Annie, who looked like a corpse. Blood was running from the corners of her plastic eyes, and she was holding a bloody toy in her hands. The girl said that she was in a lot of pain, and asked her older brother to help her. Then Cool saw another familiar silhouette approaching him from the side. It turned out it was his mother. She looked at her son with anger and said that she wished he would die that day. Then the main character saw another person approaching them. This time it was his father. His charred figure walked up to him, and he told his son with disdain that he should have protected his family. At that moment, the main character realized that all of this was not real. It was all in his head. He realized that something was using his memories against him. This meant only one thing, that Shadow was still alive. As it turned out, this was indeed the case. And while the main characters were in a trance, the Shadow enveloped him with its tentacles, bringing him unbearable physical and mental pain. Meanwhile, Annika was sitting by the rock, but her face was fine. Judging by her condition, she was practically not hurt. Meanwhile, ghosts began to surround the protagonist and grab his hands. When he looked up, he saw Ghost Annika approaching him, holding her broken sword in her hands. Before the protagonist could say anything, she stabbed him right in the chest. From severe pain, he fell to his knees and began to cough. At that moment, all the ghosts stood over him and asked him if he really thought he could steal what belonged to them. Meanwhile, Cool realized that this pain was real. The Shadow was currently trying to kill him. He felt like he was losing a lot of blood, but it seemed like he couldn't do anything about it. Then suddenly he felt someone approaching him from behind. When he turned around, he saw himself as a child. Little Cool turned to him and called him pathetic. The main character looked at the boy with one arm in bewilderment and asked him what he was doing here. In response to this, the boy said that he himself had called him here. Then the protagonist asked the younger version of himself if he could help him. He thought to himself that perhaps it was his subconscious that was resisting the Shadow. When the boy said that he couldn't do anything in that condition, he was simply useless because he was one-armed. Cool tried to convince him that it was not true, because the fact that he had lost his arm did not mean anything, and he would be able to adapt and someday build newer and stronger arms. Then the boy asked him if this hand had helped him, because no matter what he did, the outcome would always be the same. He asked the main character why try so hard if nothing would come of it anyway. These words made the boy very angry. He jumped up from his seat, despite the dagger sticking out of his chest, and asked the boy if he heard what he was saying. The hero asked the boy if he really thought it was better to act as if he didn't care. He said that he saw right through him, and that the boy was simply a coward. Cool said that he would rather die in this god-forsaken world than accept defeat as the boy did, and then pulled the dagger out of his chest. At that moment, he realized that he had been so focused on what would happen if he failed that he had not seen the truth before his eyes. Then he turned to the boy and asked if he had another healthy hand that he hid in his pocket. He asked why he didn't show what he was hiding there. However, the boy doubted that it would work. He said that he was afraid that he would let everyone down. However, the main character assured him that this would not happen. Hearing this, the boy agreed and said that this was their only option, after which he took his hand out of his pocket. His hand began to glow with a bright light due to the fact that he was clutching the amulet in his palm. After this, the boy wished the older version of himself good luck, and released the amulet that belonged to the demon from his hand. At that moment, Cool, as if coming out of a trance, opened his eyes. He saw a bright glow in front of him and realized that it was the source of the shadow anima. Cool knew he had to destroy it, because that was the only way to kill the creature. At this moment, the shadow was right behind him, but the protagonist was ready to reflect its blow. He turned sharply, placed the amulet on his metal hand and held it out in front of him. Immediately after this, a powerful explosion was heard, which literally incinerated the monster's body. The explosion was so hot that the main character had to jump back. He felt very hot, and it seemed to him as if he was burning alive. However, when he looked at the dissolving body of the shadow, he realized that his plan had worked. Then he was ready to deliver the finishing blow, and struck the demon's torso with his metal hand. After this, another powerful explosion was heard, the blast wave from which threw the main character far back. The explosion caused cracks to appear throughout the cave, but somehow magically they didn't reach the place where Annika was sitting. At that moment it stopped and began to glow brightly blue near my chest. Suddenly the girl opened her mouth and quietly exhaled. Meanwhile, people were moving into the cave. It was a group of 5 adventurers. The man in the middle said it was a waste of time. The child had gone into the dungeon to be killed, and now they had to go and save him. The bald man walking next to him said he was willing to bet 20 coins that they would find his corpse inside. The girl who was walking next to him said that she was very cold, to which the bald man replied that at least she had hair that could warm her up, and all the heat of his body went straight through his head. The girl exhaled dissatisfiedly and asked him if he could at least not mention his baldness once. Then the man with the beard said that he needed to confirm quickly that the guy was dead so that they could get out of there. However, when they reached the middle of the cave, they saw something incredible. In the middle of the cave there was a huge stone block. In the very center of it, one of his hands was sealed, corrupted and made of ice. They then noticed that nearby there was something like an ice wall, inside of which was a guy, and at the other end was a young girl. Both of them were unconscious. The boy was lying on his back, holding his chest with his hand, while the frozen shadow reached out to him with its hand. The amulet was still lying on his mechanical arm, which had wide cracks running along it. After some time, Cool finally opened his eyes and discovered that he was in a hospital room. He jumped up suddenly and pain shot through his body. His torso was wrapped in bandages. Annika was standing at the door of his room, asking him if he had finally woken up. The guy looked at the girl frantically and asked what condition she was in and what happened to them, to which the doll replied that they were in the Adventurers Guild. At that moment, Kalia entered the room. She said that the boys were in bad condition, so she asked their doctors and engineers to examine them. It was strange, but they had no records of a doll with an appearance like Annika's. She was made of a special material that they didn't have. So the engineers had to make implants out of memory steel, which wasn't perfect, but it should have mimicked the properties of the original well. However, the main character was dissatisfied when he saw the girl in front of him, and asked her if she had really brought them here to lock them up. Kalia adjusted her glasses and said that she didn't intend to do that, but her kindness would come at a price. For their sake she hoped that they would answer her questions honestly. Then she asked how the cripple and the broken doll cleared the S-Class dungeon. When the boys heard that this dungeon was not Class C, they were extremely surprised. When Cool realized that after this the dungeon was another time, many things became clear to him. He could not rewrite his merits. The only reason they got out of there safe and sound was Annika. When the woman heard this, a note of disbelief appeared on her face. Their conversation continued, and the woman told what really happened in that dungeon. Annika was shocked when she was told that she had summoned the ice. Hearing this, the protagonist smiled and said that it seemed like she wasn't that broken after all. However, the girl did not understand how this could happen, because she thought that her core was not capable of controlling anima. Then the hero assumed that when the stone broke, it threw out enough anima to recharge her core and produce ice. Kalia thought to herself that this sounded plausible, but even battle dolls had a limit to the amount of anima they could use at one time. Adventurers had reported that the ice had filled the entire dungeon. Anima control of this scale could only be seen in the most powerful battle dolls. However, she couldn't find any information about this doll in the guild database. It was as if it was a ghost. After this, the girl turned to the guy and asked him to tell her more about the dungeon, and asked if they really saw the shadow of the witch. Cool said that they actually saw her. It was a terrifying creature that looked like a human, and even spoke. It constantly talked about someone's death. Kalia explained that a shadow is a being made of pure anima. Creating one is a high-level technique, but the reason why they are so dangerous is because they have thoughts and emotions and even memories. By creating memories, he creates a target, and the target gives him strength. When Annika heard that memories create purpose, these words interested her. The hero wondered if the shadow really thought that the amulet protected the warrior who was depicted on the statue. Perhaps the shadow thought that it would save someone. Kalia continued, saying that in order to create a shadow that could speak and understand abstract concepts like death, an incredibly powerful artifact would be needed. These words interested the protagonist, because he understood that they had been through so much and even risked their lives. So now he was worried whether this little thing could be quite expensive. However, the woman answered negatively. She said that if they wanted to get a reward for the quest, the integrity of the artifact was important. When the main character heard this, he was noticeably upset. He realized he had screwed up, and things would have been much better if he hadn't had to break it. Annika, it is clear what she is experiencing now. The main character was filled with sympathy for him. The hero then said that the thing was stuck. The heat should have melted the metal, and he would need to get some tools from the workshop to try to get it out. But Kalia advised him not to do this, since even a damaged shard could have magical protection. The hero then asked her if he would have to get a new arm now. Kalia said that anime specialists could safely remove it, but she couldn't bring him to them without writing a report. The doll then asked if anyone outside the guild could help them, and she, being a woman, replied that they were in a small town, and there weren't many anime experts to turn to. However, suddenly an idea came into her head, and she said that she knew a woman who could help. The boys were very surprised when they heard that it was about a woman. Kalia said that she has experience that is not inferior to that of the researchers from the guild, and sometimes even surpasses it, but she is a little willful. She said that if the guys wanted, she could send a message asking to meet. Cool was extremely surprised that this seemingly cold doll was willing to help them. Annika didn't understand what was going on. She said that Kalia forced them to leave the guild, and then they attacked Cool when he wanted to get a license, and now they decided to help them. Kalia thought to herself that she had originally really planned to arrest them for stealing guild property. As it turned out, not long before this, a group of adventurers had found the main character and brought him to the guild. They said they found the boy in bad shape and asked Kalia what to do with him. The girl looked at them coldly and said that he had made such a fuss, and in the end it had led to nothing good. And then she ordered them to take the guy to the infirmary, and then asked what happened to the doll. The man said that they put it in the dungeon, since there was no point in dragging it so far. At this moment, the main character spoke up, which greatly surprised Kalia. He said that they couldn't leave Annika and asked the team to go back for her. Upon hearing this, the man yelled at him, saying that if they didn't take him to a healer soon, he was finished, so he should just lie back down and shut up. However, despite his condition, the protagonist deliberately fell off the stretcher. He crawled towards where he was brought from and said that this girl had saved his life, so he couldn't leave her there. At that moment, a bald guy appeared in front of him and asked him to stop wasting their time. These words had an incredible impact on the protagonist, and with a terrifying expression on his face, he ordered the man to get out of his way. When the boy saw his face, he began to tremble with horror. Then he swung at the protagonist and hit him in the head with his fist, pinning him face down to the ground. Then he jumped away from him and continued to look at him for some time, waiting for his reaction. Meanwhile, Kalia watched everything that was happening, her face seemingly devoid of any emotion. When the bald guy laughed, saying that this guy was just a chatterbox. However, suddenly, the girl ordered the adventurers to bring the doll here. When she noticed a shadow of doubt on the bald guy's face, she told him to stop being stupid and bring the doll here immediately. The whole group was shocked by how furiously Kalia behaved. When she shouted at them to run after the doll immediately, they immediately turned around and ran back to the dungeon. The girl thought to herself that in this world there were people like him, people who would put their lives on the line for a doll. Then Annika repeated her question and asked the girl again why she changed her mind. Kalia said that if she had reported them, she would have had to admit that she had had recordings stolen that she was responsible for. So she felt it was in the best interests of everyone present to keep it a secret. The protagonist asked if it was just self-preservation. Meanwhile, the doll doubted that they could trust this specialist, and it seemed that they were not in for a warm welcome. However, Cool said that they should still try, and although the girls didn't know it yet, he easily finds a common language with people. As it turned out, it was about a woman who lived in a workshop that looked rather gloomy. She was sitting at her chair when her worker came in. He addressed a woman named Wisp and said that he received a message from the Adventurers Guild. They say that there are people who need her help. It was about an adventurer and his doll. Hearing this, the woman screamed and asked why the hell he was wasting her time with this shitty message. She said that she had said a lot of times that the only thing she hated more than adventurers were dolls. After some time, the protagonist, along with Annika and his friend Momo, set off on a journey. He said that the head doll sent them to an anime specialist who could safely remove the artifact from his hand. However, he was worried about what Momo was doing there, so the girl said that they were very lucky that she personally agreed to accompany them, since without her they wouldn't even know where to go. The protagonist said that regular cards would have been enough, and that he would have felt less irritation from them. Annika, watching their strange relationship, didn't know how to react. She noted that the boys were quite close and suggested that they were partners or lovers. However, the guys suddenly started waving their hands and said that this was absolutely not true. Momo said that it just so happened that their mothers were friends, and they were about the same age. After this, Cool turned to his old friend and thanked her again for keeping what happened a secret, since his mother already had enough to worry about. But the girl replied that she still couldn't believe that he actually went into the dungeon without telling anyone about it. Then the main character pointed to the doll and said that, fortunately, it covered him. Otherwise, he would not have been able to get out of there. Anika thought to herself that even if it was an accident, she was finally useful, and maybe she wasn't as badly damaged as she thought. However, the hero noted that it was sad that they failed to remove the stone, in general, so they could have been one step closer to helping Annie. However, now he had to spend time removing this fragment. However, Momo decided not to be discouraged, and said that in that case they needed to go to that woman as quickly as possible. The protagonist was inspired by her mood, and they walked forward cheerfully. Soon the boys reached a small room that stood under a large tree. Anika asked if there was an anime specialist living here, at which point Cool suggested that Momo had brought them to the wrong place, as it was some gray-haired mountain man's house. But the girl assured them that they had come to the right place. However, Cool was still hesitant as the town was quite small, and he had never heard of anyone living in the place. At that moment, the door opened and a young apprentice of the weaponsmith named Leon greeted the guys and said that they should be the ones sent by the guild, but said that unfortunately, the master was a little busy right now, so they could not accept them. However, Momo was determined. She went inside without permission and said that it was an official request from the guild. The protagonist even had to apologize for her behavior. However, Leon stopped them. He said that if they were going to go in, they would have to leave the doll outside. Anika looked at him suspiciously and asked what she did wrong. The boy then quickly apologized and said that his mistress hated dolls, especially fighting ones, and she would kill him if he let her in. But the protagonist said that Anika would not cause any problems, and asked Leon to just let them talk to his mistress. However, the doll said that she could wait outside without any problem, but Cool said that she shouldn't do that. The girl insisted. She said that it was more important now to remove the fragment, and she did not have to be there. Eventually the protagonist agreed, and then Leon was able to breathe a sigh of relief. However, the guy asked Anika not to go too far, and promised that he would not stay long. Meanwhile, the girl went outside and calmly waited for her friend to do all his business. Meanwhile, Cool and Momo were looking at the armory with interest. The guy assumed that it must be a weapons forge. To work with anima artifacts, you need to be an experienced weaponsmith. However, the quality of the steel on the weapons here left much to be desired. He had seen better weapons at the dump, so he didn't understand why Kalia had sent them here. Meanwhile, Anika sat on the threshold of the house and thought about who she was. She still had doubts about being a battle doll. She was able to create ice in the dungeon, but she still didn't know how exactly it happened. She doubted that she had this ability all along. Then the girl firmly decided that she needed to try to do it one more time. Meanwhile, Lejeune said that the guild needed help with an anima artifact and asked what exactly their problem was. The protagonist explained that they were in a difficult situation and ended up with an anima stone stuck in his hand that needed to be removed without him dying. The boy said that it was amazing and he had no experience with it, but asked to let him take a look. The protagonist decided that it would not harm him in any way, so he extended his hand. Meanwhile, Anika, standing outside, concentrated to use the skill again. She raised her hands to the sky, hoping that ice would appear from them. However, in the end, absolutely nothing happened. The girl didn't understand how she managed to do it last time. Meanwhile, Leon was examining the protagonist's hand under a magnifying glass. He said it was amazing, and that he had never seen anything like it. This stone was created many years ago, as can be judged by its crystalline structure, a sign of exposure to extremely high concentrations of anima. The protagonist explained that he found the stone in a dungeon and was protected by the witch's shadow, but he could not take credit for it because he would have died if the doll had not been with him. Meanwhile, the girl was still trying to use the spell and decided that maybe she needed more anima, since Cool said that the dolls sucked the anima out of the summoners, and she could try to suck more out of him, but she didn't know how to do it. She thought about the last time she felt the anima entering her core. It happened when she first woke up. She felt the anima flowing through her like electricity, but it didn't hurt. The feeling even calmed her down. The girl decided that she just needed to remember this feeling. When she tried to do this, the crystals in her chest began to glow blue. Meanwhile, Wisp sat on her chair and slept. Suddenly she smelled a strange odor and began to sniff. Meanwhile, something strange was happening in the workshop. As it turned out, the amulet that was in the protagonist's hand was still working. When the protagonist put the amulet back on his hand, inside which it was burning, he felt a strange sensation. Momo immediately rushed to him to ask if he was okay, but the guy ordered her to step back. He felt the same pain he had experienced in the dungeon, and didn't understand why it was happening now. Meanwhile, Anika was practicing her skills, and this time she was pleased that she succeeded. Cool continued to experience unbearable pain. It seemed to him as if he was burning from the inside. He was determined that he had to get the stone out right now. But when he touched the door, the entire room was illuminated by an incredibly bright light. At that moment, the girl heard a strange sound behind her and turned around sharply. She saw that a powerful explosion had occurred in this small building, causing the main character to be thrown outside. The doll immediately ran up to him and asked what happened. But the gunsmith said that he didn't know what happened. The fragment suddenly lit up, and then the door just exploded. At that moment, a woman with white hair came out of the building and asked menacingly, "What is that noise?" She said it was too early for such events. She then looked closely at the walls of her building and noted that it seemed to her that there had been a door there before. At this moment, the main character seemed to be in another dimension. He saw a strange light coming from somewhere, but he didn't understand what it was. It seemed to him that this sensation lasted forever. Then he walked up to a wall that was literally made of light. He touched it with his finger, as he felt as if something was pulling him there. At that moment, circles began to appear all over the wall, as if someone had thrown a stone into the water. Cool noticed with fear in his voice that he felt as if he was being pulled inside. First his fingers were inside, and then his whole hand. After a while, half of his body was on the other side of the wall. At this point in the real world he was unconscious, and it was then decided to pour a bottle of wine right on his face. This finally caused the main character to come to his senses and start coughing. He looked at the people standing above him and asked them, "What the hell are you doing?" Above him he saw his friends, as well as a tall, fair-haired woman who looked at him with a displeased look. Wisp asked him if this was the same guy she was supposed to bill at the door. The guy then asked her who she was and what she had poured on him, as the liquid smelled like resin mixed with waste. The woman said it was a company secret, and he was honored, since she usually didn't let anyone taste her drink. Then the main character began to guess that this woman was the same anime specialist they were sent to, but he was worried about what happened. The fragment suddenly began to glow, and then some powerful release of energy occurred. Suddenly Wisp leaned over to him and started sniffing him. She said that there was some strange smell coming from Cool. Suddenly she noticed his hand. She noticed that there was a glowing shard on his mechanical arm. At that moment, the woman realized that she now knew where the smell was coming from. She thought to herself that she hadn't felt such a strong concentration of anima in many years, but she couldn't understand what could have provoked such a release. Then she looked around and realized that there was a doll standing next to her. Then Wisp realized that it was obvious that the doll was involved in all of this. The protagonist turned to her and asked if she really meant to say that she could explain what had just happened. The woman said that they had fun with things they knew nothing about, and this outcome awaited them, and now they are paying for it. The protagonist's comrades began to speculate that this shard was dangerous, and Cool began to think that perhaps they were right, and they needed a different approach. However, he asked the guys not to worry and said that Wisp most likely does not know what kind of shard it is, because she is just an old woman. When the woman heard this, she said that he could drain every last drop of knowledge from his brain, and it would still not be enough to fill the bottle she pours herself with drink. At that moment, the guys realized that the woman had spat on their provocation, but they were surprised at how easy it was. Then she pointed at the boy, and asked if he really wanted to know what happened, and suggested that he ask his doll. The protagonist turned to Anika and asked her if she knew what happened, but the girl did not have an answer to this question. Then Wisp asked her if she really hadn't tried to manipulate the anima. Noticing the surprised expression on his face, she said that everything was as she expected. She guessed that the doll was trying to use its element without crafting. When the woman realized that Anika didn't even know what crafting was, she said again that she hated dolls because they only made everything more complicated. She pointed at Leon and said that even this brat knew about the 3 stages of anima manipulation. Then the guy said that anima is the energy that flows in all living beings. Everything in this world is believed to be made of it, just in different forms, but there is a way to transform one form of anima into another. This is what they call manipulation, and it involves 3 stages. The first stage is called invocation. The manipulator calls the anima from his center so that it can be accessed and controlled. This stage is the simplest and most familiar to people, as it is usually used to activate technologies and geovores. The second stage is called transformation. The manipulator transforms his anima into one of the 6 stable elements. Most people cannot do this naturally. It is an extremely rare ability that occurs in less than a fraction of a percent of the population. However, recent innovations in battle doll technology have made this ability more accessible. Then Momo realized that Grizz's element was fire, Kalia's element was water. But now she was interested in Annika's element. The doll replied that her element was ice, but she did not understand what this had to do with the shard in Kul's hand. Wisp explained that it was all because she hadn't thought about the third stage. In the final stage, the manipulator uses a weapon or tool called a craft to manifest his element in a way that is unique and familiar to him. The result of creation can take an infinite variety of forms, and this largely depends on the life experience of the manipulator. The hero was surprised when he heard that even battle dolls needed crafting. It turns out that Grizz's spear and Kalia's earring were not just random items, but necessary tools for manipulating anima. The woman explained that pure elemental release is a very difficult process that drains the anima. To combat this, the manipulators have found that the best way to manifest the element is through crafting. However, it is obvious that Annika skipped this step and tried to manipulate the ice using brute force. This put a strain on the summoner's anima center, and in most cases, it would have to stop and cease the exchange to preserve the summoner's anima. But this was different. The protagonist's center had a different source of energy. At this moment, the main character realized that the woman was talking about a shard. She said that it was indeed so, and although she didn't know where he got this thing from, it definitely concentrated a huge amount of anima in it. She explained that when the doll tried to take more anima than he could give her, he unknowingly took it from the shard, causing an instant release of raw, unprocessed anima. The protagonist couldn't believe that this tiny piece contained so much energy, but now he understood why the shadow protected him so much. At that moment, Annika realized that everything that was happening was her fault. When Momo heard this, she suggested that the shard could be very valuable and could be sold for a good price. Wisp replied that it could probably fetch a fortune, but only if they didn't like the boy very much, because extracting the shard would almost certainly kill him. She said that this thing was now connected to his anima center, and breaking this connection would be the same as deleting it. The woman said that if his anima center was destroyed, he would simply die of shock. Then the main character turned to his comrades and told them not to even think about touching this thing. He was very upset, because usually the body rejects foreign anima, but apparently not in this case, and now this thing will stay with him forever. At that moment, Annika looked down and admitted that she was wrong. She said that the dolls were meant to serve, they were created for that, and that was their purpose. No matter if it was a tavern or a battlefield, they had to give their all to follow that purpose. However, she was a battle doll who didn't even remember what crafting was, and it was just a nuisance. The woman watched the doll's emotions and did not know how to react. She then said that all this time she thought that dolls were just mindless machines. She said that feelings and lack of purpose are common to people, whether they admit it or not. After that, she headed back to her building and asked the guys to follow her. Wisp said with a smile that if Annika didn't remember what craft she had, then they needed to find a new one for her. When the doll heard this, at first she couldn't believe her words. Soon, they all walked back into the building together, and the woman kicked the stool that was lying at her feet. She pointed at the weapon and asked the doll to choose the one she liked, at which point Annika mentioned that Wisp had said that crafting was based on past experience, but she didn't remember her past, and therefore couldn't know which weapon was right for her. However, the woman asked her to forget about it and stop focusing on who she was before. Instead, she needed to start thinking about who she wanted to be. She told Annika to do what she thought was right. The protagonist said that he had never been into guns, but now he was thinking about getting some, although he liked his explosive discs better. Then Wisp said that he didn't need a weapon. He already had a pretty powerful weapon in his hand, and he just needed to learn how to use it. The protagonist looked again at the shard in his hand and realized that he doubted that it was a weapon at all. He remembered once again that moment when he touched the door handle, and everything in the room was illuminated by a bright light. This power almost swallowed him up. They would not like to repeat this experience anytime soon, or better yet, never. Momo then assumed that Wisp might know a lot about anime, but she doubted that she was a good weaponsmith. There was no one in the guild who would turn to her for help. Leijon then explained that Wisp had not made any of the weapons found here, and that she had not approached the forge in many years. Kul asked why all this junk was there then, but when he realized what he had just said, he immediately rushed to apologize for his rude words. The boy said he didn't know the whole story, but once upon a time this woman had been an adventurer herself, and she had been quite famous. The protagonist said that he got the impression that she hated adventurers, and then Leon assumed that it was because of that incident. However, as soon as he mentioned it, he immediately asked the other guys to forget about what he just said. He explained that Wisp really doesn't like it when someone knows about this. However, she was previously a licensed member of the adventurer group, but she didn't just fight alongside them. She also created weapons for the entire group. Thanks to her weapons, the squad rose through the ranks and eventually became one of the best in the guild. One day, they took on a quest that should have been very easy for them. But for some reason, Wisp was left out. And when they returned, one of them did not wake up. When the hero suggested that the woman was seeing herself in the death of a team member only because she wasn't there, the boy said that someone thought she was to blame. And the fact that combat dolls were invented shortly after only made matters worse. The world of adventurers changed practically overnight. Suddenly, the old way of doing things was deemed obsolete. At some point, Wisp stopped making weapons and retired altogether. Lejon called himself her apprentice, but in reality, he simply taught himself what he could, studying the items she had made in the past. At that moment, the main character felt very sorry for this young guy. He hugged him and said that he was really great and he himself had to learn everything about mechanics on his own. At that moment, Momo noticed the crossbow hanging on the wall. Cool told his new comrade that he never intended for him and the dolls to influence past generations, and now he wondered why Wisp was helping Anika. He assumed that Anika had done something to make Wisp change her mind about the dolls. Meanwhile, the doll was examining the assortment of weapons. She realized that none of these swords suited her, but she didn't think it had anything to do with them. Most likely it had something to do with her, and she was missing something. Suddenly, while the doll was training, she saw an arrow flying literally a centimeter away from her. All the boys froze in place and turned their gaze to Momo, who was standing in the corner of the room, holding a crossbow with shaking hands. She looked awkwardly at the guys and apologized for what happened. She bowed and hurried to hand over the weapon to the one who knew how to handle it. The guys were happy that no one was hurt in the end. But at that moment, the main character noticed a piece of rope hanging from the ceiling. Then he came closer to it and saw that on the floor underneath it there was a small bag containing some sharp object. The guy examined it and realized that it was something like a handle, but without a blade. He took the strange thing in his hands and realized that it reminded him of something. At that moment, Wisp ran up to him and ordered him to immediately put the thing back in place. When the protagonist looked at the woman, he saw an incredibly gloomy expression on her face. She ordered him to put the thing back if he didn't want any trouble. Cool apologized for the misunderstanding and said that it just fell on the floor. But in his heart he began to suspect something. Suddenly Leon shouted to them that someone was coming towards their house. When the boys looked through the doorway, they saw that there were indeed two figures approaching them. As it turned out, they were two soldiers, one of whom was helping his comrade to walk since he was badly wounded. When the men came inside, all the boys sat around them and asked what happened. The man couldn't start talking for a long time, but then quietly said that they were just supposed to go on a quest. They had heard reports of aggressive monsters coming down from the mountain, but the lair turned out to be much larger than they expected. More and more of them appeared, and his friends did not survive. He saw their flesh torn from their bones. The man started crying and said he could still hear them screaming. Every now and then, images of monsters devouring his comrades appeared before his eyes. He didn't understand why he could still hear their screams, which drove him crazy. At that moment, Momo leaned over to him and told him that now that he was out of there, he was safe. However, the man said that some of his group were still there, and this haunted him. He started crying and screaming that he wanted to help them, but his legs just wouldn't move. Wisp listened to his entire story with a stony expression on her face, but it seemed like something was bothering her. Then the main character turned to his partner, and she immediately agreed that they couldn't wait any longer and needed to go there immediately. Soon the guys left the task and went to the place where the quest was supposed to take place. Momo turned to Leon and Wisp and asked them if they were sure that her comrades would be okay. The guy confidently asked her not to worry. He said that he gave Anika a quality weapon. At that moment, the woman thought to herself that she was a real fool in all this fuss. She forgot to take that damn thing from that guy. And then she looked at the rope that was hanging from the ceiling and realized that it was a hollow blade. The woman was extremely unhappy when she realized that this story was repeating itself again. Meanwhile, the protagonist took that sharp thing with him. He didn't know why Wisp reacted like that when he touched it, but he could tell that it was made of a highly anime-sensitive material. He thought that this could be his perfect weapon, but it would be very capricious, and he doubted that Anika would be able to control it. He remembered that picture again when he saw the doll, which was in the very middle of the blast wave. After some thought, he came to the conclusion that it would be too dangerous, and he didn't want to expose her to that risk anymore. Meanwhile, the girl ran to the right place and looked with concern at the doll who was running behind her. They soon arrived at the place where the battle was taking place, and saw Grizz and his master there, who were surrounded by monsters. The man, looking at everything that was happening, realized that things were bad for them. He learned that Toppa had almost no anima left, At that moment, one of the monsters rushed straight at them. Grizz readied his weapon and knew he needed to deal with them as soon as possible. He dealt a crushing blow to the monster, and a wave of fire flew from his weapon. The man watched as the monster flew straight into the ring of fire and seemed to dissolve there. However, the next moment, he jumped out of the ring of fire and rushed straight at the doll. Grizz barely had time to put his weapon in front of him to block his clawed paws. These were stone lions, Titan-class monsters, a type of cat that lived in mountainous areas. And through evolution they learned to create a shell of earth that protected them from physical and anima attacks. At that moment, the doll realized that her flames could not penetrate their defenses. Then his owner came to his aid and tried to hit the monster with his axe. However, at that moment another lion jumped on him. He grabbed him by the leg and threw him to the ground. The weapon fell from his hands and he was unable to defend himself. At that moment, the man looked up and saw that the animal had suddenly jumped back somewhere. Tapa looked back and saw the leader of the lions standing next to him, with his henchmen surrounding him. Then he looked again at the lion that was holding his leg, and realized that he could not move. When the man looked up, he saw another beast flying towards him, ready to deliver the finishing blow. However, at the last moment he was saved by the main character, who pushed the beast away from him with his body. Tapa was horrified when he saw that this man had knocked down such a powerful beast with one blow. Then he took a closer look and recognized this guy. That upstart from the guild. Meanwhile, Cool rose to his feet and said with a smile that it was pretty close. Then he looked up and saw a familiar man standing in front of him. He asked Tapa with displeasure what he was doing there, to which the man said that he could ask him the same thing. Grizz was watching everything that was happening and realized that this guy was also from the guild. However, when he looked up, he saw that same doll with long blue hair flying towards him. With one deft blow, she tried to knock down the lion, who was sitting right on Grizz. However, this attempt was not successful, and her sword simply broke. The girl looked in shock at her broken weapon, which turned out not to have caused any damage to this monster. The protagonist slapped himself in the face when he remembered that Leon had told them before leaving that he had prepared the best weapon for them. However, this attempted attack made the lion very angry and he rushed straight at the doll. Grizz knew he barely had enough strength to hold back his onslaught. At the last moment, he gathered all his strength and with one blow pushed the monster away from himself. He then turned to Annika and asked what it was, to which the girl replied that they came here to save them. At that moment, their attention was drawn to a screaming blonde man. He pointed to the lion, which was still holding his leg, and said that everyone had forgotten about him. He then grabbed his axe and hit the monster hard on the head. However, the boys quickly noticed that the rest of the lions had approached them and were now completely surrounded. The leader let out a powerful roar, and all of his limbs began to sparkle with green energy. At this moment, the main character shouted to the guys that the monsters were approaching. Suddenly, Annika appeared behind him and quietly apologized for what was going to happen next. In an instant, she was behind him and snatched the sharp thing that was hanging from his belt. Then she rushed in the opposite direction, holding an incomprehensible thing in her hands. When the protagonist looked down, he realized that the thing on his belt was no longer there. Finally, Annika turned to him and told him that he would have to trust her. Meanwhile, the story moves back 20 years. A young wisp was sitting in her armory and talking to a young guy who said that in his opinion, this is her best work. In his hands he was holding that very sharp thing. This guy's name was Leaf. He was 28 years old and he was an adventurer. He could not fully believe that the girl was able to forge hollow steel, because even the royal blacksmiths could not do this. The woman said that there was nothing special about it. For her it was like child's play. The man began to wave the steel and think about what kind of weapon it would create. He had heard that such steel had incredible transformative powers. However, the woman asked him to be careful, as they had not tested her yet. Leif assured her that everything would be fine, as her weapons had never failed them. But their conversation was interrupted by a fat man who suddenly appeared on the threshold of their workshop. Wisp was surprised to see him here, as she had put the man on the waiting list months ago. But the man was not happy with the turn of events. He said that Wisp was the only one he would trust to supply his guards, and promised to pay her 200 crowns for it. However, the woman said that she could not do this because they already had too many quests. At that moment, Leif approached her and said that this man was offering payment equal to 10 quests. He then stated that they would handle this quest, and that she should take care of this steel, since it was the perfect opportunity to test the new full blade, and besides, he and his team were tired of sitting under her skirt. At some point the woman thought about it, but eventually agreed. The man was very happy that she accepted his proposal. Finally, Wisp turned to Leif and asked him to be as careful as possible. However, the guy asked her not to worry and said that her weapon would definitely protect him. Even though the woman let him go, she felt uneasy. After some time, people on the street said that the adventurers had returned. The woman was surprised because they dealt with it quite quickly. She realized that, apparently, they really didn't need her. She decided that next time she would go with them so that they would not think that they were capable of anything without her. However, when Wisp went outside, she heard that people were grieving over the death of an adventurer who had recently had a child. As soon as the woman suspected something was wrong, she immediately rushed through the crowd. What she saw in front of her shocked her, and for several moments she could not move. In front of her lay the corpse of a man, blood dripping from his hand. When the woman looked closely, she realized it was Leaf. His legs and left arm were torn off, and his entire body was covered in blood. The woman immediately rushed to the stretcher and asked the other soldiers what had happened. At that moment, one of them turned away and took something out of the dead soldier's pocket. He handed the woman a bloody bag and said that they were afraid to touch it directly, as this thing had caused Leaf's horrible death. Wisp picked up the bloody bag and looked inside in horror. As it turned out, inside she saw the same hollow steel that she had made just recently. After this event, she could not come to her senses for a long time, and now, when history was repeating itself, she felt very bad. She realized that at that time they had no idea how dangerous this hollow steel was. It is able to sense and accept the properties of the anima it comes into contact with. An incredible amount of anima and a complete understanding of the weapon one wishes to create are required. Otherwise, the steel will reflect all the energy back to the wielder. This weapon is capable of killing her the second she decides to create something with it. However, Anika, holding this weapon in her hand, asked the protagonist to trust her. Meanwhile, the monsters were getting closer and closer to them. The main character was scared. He understood that this steel was practically a living organism, and if it hesitated even for a moment, it would be the end of them all. Before his eyes again appeared the image of a half-destroyed Anika, who asked him why he allowed her to do this. However, his thoughts were interrupted by Leo, who rushed straight at them. The boys realized that they needed to somehow defend themselves, since the monsters were approaching. Cool decided to take command and told the boys to hold them off until Anika finished them off. However, Tapa was not happy with this decision, and asked if he was really going to entrust their lives to some broken doll. When the girl heard this, sadness appeared on her face. She constantly heard that she was broken, spoiled, or useless. But now she realized that she was really tired of all this. Meanwhile, one of the lions ran straight towards the main character. Before he could attack him, a huge stone wall rose between them. As it turned out, the monster jumped up and pushed off from its top. The protagonist was surprised that these monsters could manipulate the earth and use it for such purposes. Watching the monster's quick jumps, he realized that they were keeping up with them. Then Cool suddenly noticed that the shard on his hand was starting to glow. Meanwhile, Grizz continued to fight off the monsters that surrounded him from all sides. At that moment, he remembered the popular saying that battle dolls don't live long, and decided that it was rather unfair. When he looked up, he saw another monster jumping at him. He prepared himself for death to overtake him, but suddenly something stopped the lion. As it turned out, all the lions that surrounded the doll were as if frozen. The stone block that Lev was inside was literally a couple of centimeters from Grizz's face. When the rest of the boys looked around, they realized that they were surrounded by an ice wall in which the monsters were chained. As it turns out, Anika was able to activate her ice craft using the hollow blade. She looked at the weapon in surprise and couldn't believe that it was her craft. The sensations were better than from the previous weapon, and the girl felt perfect balance. She felt as if this blade was literally made for her. Seeing this, Cool was very happy, because he realized that the girl had finally managed to do what she had wanted for so long. However, Tapa was not delighted. He did not understand how a second-rate doll could master crafting. Grizz thought to himself that just a couple of days ago, she couldn't even control the anima, and now she can create so much ice with just one swing of this blade. Meanwhile, one of the monsters was watching everything that was happening, and when he saw his frozen brothers, he began to shake with fear. After that, he ran away, and the main character saw it. Then he thought of something. The thing is that magical creatures capable of controlling anima use their abilities only as a last resort, and now the hero felt like he was missing something. At that moment, the boys felt the ground beneath their feet begin to shake. They were extremely surprised that the earthquake began so suddenly, but Cool said that it was too localized, as if something huge was moving underground. At that moment, Anika noticed that a huge crack was appearing next to her. In literally an instant, the landscape split apart, and Anika and the protagonist found themselves below, while Grizz and his master rose up on an earthen platform. When the man looked up, he couldn't believe what he saw. There was something towering over him, a huge stone monster that looked at him with glowing green eyes. The main character looked at everything that was happening and could not believe his eyes. In front of him was a real apex golem. These were ancient creatures of incredible strength and size. They lived in mountainous regions. Folk legends said that golems created these very mountains. They were sedentary organisms living in symbiosis with other more active creatures and possessing the ability to create the landscape in exchange for protection and the elimination of pests. Cool then suggested that this was why the lions were able to change the landscape by borrowing anima from this guy. However, Toppa was worried about another question. He did not understand how they could kill this creature, since it was a Leviathan-class beast. Suddenly he saw that the monster raised its paw. After that, he suddenly dropped it on the place where the men had just been. When the dust from the impact settled, the protagonist immediately began looking for his partner. The girl came up to him from behind and said that this monster was too big, and they wouldn't be able to escape. She then held her weapon out in front of her and said that in that case they would have to fight. She used her craft and sent several ice walls towards him at once. However, this monster was too big for these walls to have any effect on it. With one blow of his foot, he destroyed everything that Annika had created. At this point, the protagonist realized that Annika's ice craft would not be enough in this case. Then he prepared his explosive devices and threw them straight towards the golem. They attached themselves to different parts of his stone body. Before the monster could even comprehend what was happening, the devices exploded on his body. They did little damage to him, but they made him very angry. At this point, the protagonist noticed that the golem was holding onto the area on his neck. He realized that there was a core there, and if they concentrated their attacks on it, they would have a chance to defeat it. However, he suddenly saw that the monster was stretching its huge stone paw towards his companion. The girl held her blade out in front of her, but she looked insignificantly small against the backdrop of this monster. Suddenly she saw that Grizz came to her aid, who used his firecraft and created a spell called the Flaming Sickle. The girl was extremely surprised when she saw the fiery element. She looked up and saw the doll standing on the platform. The guy turned to her and said that he was just paying her back. While he was talking, he didn't notice that the golem's hand was approaching him. The monster grabbed the doll and squeezed it in his fist, causing Grizz to fly apart into two pieces. The upper part of his body flew off to the side, mechanical components raining down from it. The boys froze in horror as they watched how this monster dealt with the fighting doll so easily. The main character immediately rushed to his aid, realizing that they needed to save their partner. Meanwhile, the doll's owner froze on the mountain, watching everything that was happening with fear. He did not believe that someone could kill the fighting doll. Then he opened his system and decided to summon a new one. He didn't care about rank. However, the system told him that he didn't have enough funds to summon. As it turned out, he spent too much choosing a rare doll. Then Toppa decided that he had no choice but to throw off all his heavy armor. After that, he ran away from the battlefield, realizing that if he stayed there, he would die. Finally, he said that his life was 20 times more valuable than the life of anyone present there, and he must definitely save himself. At this moment, Grizz, on the verge of death, watched his owner run away. Although he was disappointed, he understood that this situation did not surprise him. At that moment, a bright glow appeared before his eyes, and he felt that their anima connection was disappearing. Realizing that only his upper body and one arm remained, Grizz realized that this was probably the end.